The Children's Commissioner says New Zealand's child poverty statistics are a national embarrassment.
Tens of thousands of people are homeless in this country.
Students are returning to school hungry and without the very basics.
Experts discussed some of the causes for increasing rates of preventable illnesses in children, and there was one common theme: poverty.
Poverty in New Zealand. It's real, it's brutal, it's endemic. We are meant to live in a first world paradise, but the stats don't lie, exposing our shameful, not so little secret.
There's been a significant increase in the number of New Zealand children living in poverty. More than 23,000 more children were recorded living in material hardship than the year before.
Dave Letele knows it without looking at the stats. Poverty is on the rise, and he and his staff are struggling to stay ahead of it.
We can't keep up. We actually don't know how long we can keep going.
Nearly 144,000 children, that's 1 in 8, are now in material hardship. For Māori, it's 1 in 5 and 1 in 4, nearly 29% of Pacifica children.
Well, it's heartbreaking when you think of the children. Everything we do here is for children, they have no choice of where they're born into.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, tackling poverty in New Zealand. What causes it, who's affected, what the fallout is, and what we can do to eradicate it. Because right now it's not hard to find Kiwis doing it tough, really tough. Their stories on the news every day.
I find at times that even half a dozen eggs I can't afford. This is really hard. And people don't understand it.
The 75-year-old's pantry is strikingly barren. Her fridge, it's even emptier. Some onions, half a cabbage, not much else.
Not enough. Income right now, being on a benefit as a solo parent, is not enough. It's not livable right now.
We have students coming to school without uniform, without devices, without lunch, and they come to school hungry because they haven't had breakfast that morning. We see that every day.
A number of children complaining about sore teeth and not being able to get to their dentist.
Cold, damp and dirty living conditions are contributing to a rise in respiratory illnesses in children.
So this week, a 3-day conference will be held in Wellington to address systemic causes of poverty in New Zealand and the options for change. Titled Poverty by Design, it's billed as the first in New Zealand to analyse the economic, governmental, legal and institutional systems that have created and locked in poverty and ask whether a developed nation should continue to tolerate it. Sessions will cover everything from the cost of poverty and welfare and inequality to housing and homelessness and the politics of poverty. Finding hope will also be discussed.
This is a fantastic opportunity to shine a spotlight on the voices that are often unheard. So that's those people who are experiencing poverty, but also the people who are supporting them at the grassroots.
That's Stephen Turnick, the director of the Downtown Community Ministry, a leading social service working with the homeless. He knows firsthand what it's like to be in both those positions. He grew up facing poverty and hardship and has lived rough.
Oh, it's quite a story.
We'll have more on that soon, but first, the Poverty by Design conference. Stephen will chair one of the panels, which will feature a range of speakers from research backgrounds and the front lines, as well as people in the thick of it.
Bringing that voice alongside those people who are experts in research, policy, government, and sharing those experiences and sharing the evidence and being able to discuss those real-world implications and finding actionable steps. Those are fantastic opportunities that this conference brings. And that's representative of the barriers or that we currently experience in poverty. And that's that all our systems, government, policy, forward-facing services, we all operate in such siloed approaches and independently of each other, whereas we all have such major impact on our decisions right across the system, most importantly around policy decision. So this is a fantastic opportunity to kind of bring that all together and share our learnings and look for some solutions.
Poverty in New Zealand, what does it look like today, Stephen?
It's far-reaching. It's right across our country. It's growing. And we quite often think about poverty is lacking resources, financial resources, but it also impacts our mental and physical health. It impacts our educational outcomes and really the overall well-being of people. But most importantly is the impact it has on children. And their potential is limited by circumstances outside of their control. And that's one of the kind of worst things that poverty is impacting our country. So it's not just the people now here that we see, for example, us rough sleeping, can't get access to a home, people sleeping in cars, people struggling with 2 jobs and barely making rent, which now makes up around 75% of our income. It is a whole group of generations to come that are also being impacted by it.
High inflation, the pandemic and the cost of living crisis are being blamed for thousands more children falling into poverty.
The rising cost of living as a consequence of the pandemic will be responsible for some of it, but this is a story of low incomes not catching up.
What are the sort of primary causes of poverty in New Zealand, do you think?
So I guess it's really systemic failures, in short. Poverty is not a decision or inevitable outcome for people. It is a direct result of our systems and failures in our systems. So, for example, education, a child growing up in a low income, lacking the access to quality early child education. So that sets them back right from the start. And they're also experiencing hunger, poor living conditions, lack of educational resources. And by the time they reach high school, they are at such a disadvantage and really strongly in that cycle. So when we approach that, we're not approaching that from a complete well-being perspective. Education deals with education, whether or not you're meeting certain required education outcomes. Housing deals with it from a housing, and we're in a world now where basically you've got to meet certain criteria to access even short-term emergency housing. Our health system sits over here. They are not working, or our systems, our policies are not working in cohesion to look at the overall well-being. And therefore, we talk about this, and we've talked about this for generations. Therefore, people continue to fall through the cracks, and the cracks appear in such many different areas.
I've done stories in the past about, one family, a family of 6 with 1 toothbrush between them. We're supposed to be a first world paradise, and yet at times we feel like a third world country. Do you feel that as well?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And that's what we have to really ask ourselves, is that acceptable in Aotearoa? We are a developed nation. So therefore, is this acceptable? And it needs to be a question that we approach right across. It's not just government, it's communities, it's families, it's everyone needs to ask that, because it takes everyone to be part of the solution. But we do need to ask ourselves that question and really step into, a call of action about how do we come together and say enough's enough. And that's where the solution really lies, is about that coming together cohesively with a agreed outcome of solving this, because it's not good enough for our country.
He knows what it's like to live rough. He knows what it's like to have no money, to be on the wrong side of the law, to feel desperate and not part of a community. He's walked in the worn shoes of those he's now helping.
Oh, it's quite a story. I was adopted as a young Māori baby to a young mother, and raised in a predominantly Pākehā family. Raised in a very loving family. We were certainly well looked after. My parents worked very, very hard. I guess you could consider financially struggling with 3 young boys. What came with that was some degree of dysfunction. Early 80s in Christchurch, there was a high degree of racism. So I experienced a lot of racism growing up, a lot of people pointing the finger and saying, you're different, why are you this way? Or the fact that you are different, you are deserving of being treated in quite a mean, nasty way, especially my years at college. That, I guess, encouraged me to seek other friends, other associates who were experiencing similar circumstances in their life, and unfortunately that quite often comes with living quite a high risk lifestyle. So what came with that is a journey towards alcohol, drugs, crime, running away from home, being in boys' homes, ending up in court. So, yeah, I went for a real kind of period between probably about 12 through to 16 of dysfunction and really trying to work out who I was and where I stood in this world. I was really, really fortunate, though. I still had very supportive, loving people around me. And through that support and a love of sport, I kind of decided to take an alternative path. So I went back to playing rugby. I managed to get some employment, and just really stability of that took me out of that pathway to probably prison and prison in and out for the rest of my life, to one where I was able to go to university, kind of take my lived experience into a place where I can make use of it. And that's where I entered into the world of social work and ended up being a social worker in residence in Christchurch at Kingsley, which was Child, Youth and Family at that time. And just really kind of took off and built this career, built a family of my own. And short story, here I am now leading an organisation that does some really amazing things in very similar kind of circumstances.
I love that. I love that because it's a story of hope, and having lived it firsthand, you know what people are going through. I want to know, though, when you sort of were doing that living rough, facing sort of poverty, crime, drugs, alcohol, what sort of toll does that take on you mentally, sort of emotionally, and even physically?
Oh, it's a huge toll, and it's the sort of toll you don't realise until later on in life. So absolutely, mentally, you learn to place emotions, feelings such as love, care, etc., at a very, very locked away place in your life. You can't and you don't share that, or you don't express that. Therefore, you become very hard. You become very sterile to other people's feelings. And what also comes with that is you start to learn to treat people differently, and you lose that ability to communicate effectively. And then, therefore, you start to reflect that on yourself and how you look at yourself and your own self-identity, your self-esteem. You constantly being told you don't live up to a standard, you don't meet this, you don't meet that. And you start to reflect on yourself and believe that you're not worth that. So what the heck, what the hell? Then there's the physical, which quite often doesn't come later in life. But yes, there's the physical impact of being anxious for many, many years of your life does come. It comes with things such as heart disease. It comes with things such as mental health problems. It comes with things such as respiratory problems. They're all associated to that sort of lifestyle, high degrees of anxiety, smoking, drinking, and that will come. It does come. I've seen it, and to a degree, I've experienced some of it. But it's not just for myself. It's also for the wider family. So, I will be absolutely upfront for my mother. I can't imagine the degree of sleepless nights that I put on her and my wider family, and the worry and the anxiousness. So it's not just for the person experiencing it. It does have an impact on the wider family. We experience this here where a lot of bridges have been burned, but even those relationships have been broken down, it still creates ongoing grief and ongoing negative impact, especially around health.
It's huge. I read a story with you when you had your moment of, I just don't want to do this anymore, and you were on a rooftop on a rainy night. Tell us about that and how it's sort of that impact that moment had on you.
Sure. So, I remember that as if it were yesterday. We were up to no good, and we were being actively looked for. And I sat on the roof for about 3 or 4 hours in the rain and did a lot of self-reflecting. And it was just a moment. It was just a moment that, hey, this isn't for you. This isn't what I want in life. You have to make a change. And it was very, very confronting at that moment. And it was a switch that went off in my head. Reflecting back, that happened was because I had the ability to do that. I had the ability and the support when I chose to use it to make that change. I realise for a lot of people who are in a lot worse situations than myself don't necessarily have the ability to even process in that way or even consider there is another option for you. So I do realise later in life that I was only able to do that, or what encouraged me or what supported me to make that decision was the fact that I still had positive support systems in my life. I still had connections to family that I could look to help me along that. And I, again, had other community support such as sport. I just can't talk highly enough about the impact of things such as community engagement for things such as sports or any other sort of activities.
So family sporting and community support is crucial. But what about government support?
Tackling child poverty was always a big Labour promise. The recent backslide happened under its watch and coincided with higher levels of inflation.
We do have to take responsibility, but we threw everything at it. We continue to increase the minimum wage. We significantly increased benefits.
We should be really quite concerned, because what they show is that despite the efforts of a government over 5 years to make a sustained and significant reduction in child poverty, we've only achieved modest reductions.
It's interesting because Labour were huge on it and they were saying we're going to tackle it, and, did they do enough while they were in power, do you think?
I think they some really good outcomes did come about. So, and we have seen directly some positive impact. But I guess that in itself is also what contributes to the issue. And when we're talking about, when we're talking about poverty and we're aligning that to government, we're really talking about a 12 months to 3 year time period. And then the next election comes. So what we do is quite often short term. And what it takes is some long-term generational planning and commitment to that. So the fact that we have a country where we vote every 3 years, inadvertently, that in itself creates poverty, because we're not actually working towards long-term stability and change. So yes, we may get a government that comes in with some fantastic policies, but I also would suggest that those policies still exist in silo. So there might be some policies in our health, there might be some policies in our housing, but there are not policies that create cohesion between health, education and housing. That's successive governments have never, in my opinion, ever achieved that ability. So we now see a new government coming in with a different direction, a different perspective on what is a positive solution. They will implement their policies, and quite possibly we will see another change. So until we get some, bipartisan about long-term impact, I think that's what's going to continue to get in the way.
For the last 4 years, benefits have increased in line with wage growth, but the coalition government wants to reverse that and once again tie benefit rates to inflation.
We want people receiving a main benefit to continue to have enough income to meet their basic needs, but also to ensure that the best way to get ahead is through a job.
The coalition government, you mentioned, is obviously determined to get people into work, which is great. But switching benefit indexing from wages to inflation, is that the right move, do you think, Stephen?
Oh, absolutely not. And I think that the evidence in that is the facts are that we have had a continued rise in costs. And we're living in an environment now that our housing costs are on average 75% of income. So our income has not grown at the rate, our wages has not grown at the rate that is required. So we need to lift wages and income. So in short, I don't agree with that approach.
If you had a message or a plea for the government, for the coalition government, what would it be?
I think it would come back to long-term plans and solutions and bringing people together to find those. So hearing the voice of lived experience, hearing the voice of those who are supporting them, and then aligning that directly to policy for long-term change. I would also suggest that we need to look at where do we want to get to? What does that look like? Rather than looking at the deficit problem solving the deficit. It's all good. We want to get people out of emergency housing. Absolutely agree with that. But what does that success look like? Well, success should look like we want people to be in long-term, stable housing with the right sort of supports wrapped around them that empowers them towards self-determination, mana motuhake, and they are able to nurture and bring through generations. At the moment, we're just looking at, we want to get them out of emergency housing. So, yeah, that's I think would be a good approach.
Do you fear poverty is only going to get worse in this country?
My immediate response to that approach is probably the easy way out. I think what we need to be looking at and thinking and continually putting in front of us is we can make it better. If we don't do that, then yes, you are correct. It will get worse. It's that kind of story is if we believe it's going to get worse, it will. If we don't do anything about it, it will. So I guess the only option is we need to do something together about that.
How important, Stephen, is hope when it comes to poverty?
It's extremely important. I guess I'm just reflecting on my own story, and when I reflected sitting on that roof, and again, the only reason I could do what I did, because obviously there was a degree of hope that there was something else out there for me, that I had the ability to do that. Hope brings a sense of positive outcomes, that things can change, things can be different. So without hope, we see a loss of self, we see a loss of self-worth, we see a sense of giving up, and all that has significant impact on people, communities, and systems. We had a lot of conversations in the media recently about people being seen defecating on the streets, etc., etc. That is a real example of people who have lost all hope and have absolutely no self-worth, no self-esteem. That's probably one of the examples we see quite, well, not often, for people we work with just absolute loss of hope.
What's your advice to those who are struggling today?
Seek support. Seek support of people who can bring about, I guess, support hope for you. Most importantly is we can make change, we can achieve goals, we can aspire, and where people are at does not need to be the end of that story. But we're the masters of that story. We all take final responsibility of that story. But seek people who can help you rewrite that story. Seek people to walk alongside you, and believe in yourself and your abilities that you can make significant change for the better, for not only yourself, but for people around you.
I love that. And I guess that is what the whole aim of this conference is, poverty by design.
Yes, it is. It's really looking at how we actually perpetrate poverty through primarily policy. And I haven't touched much on it, but I feel as though what's really significant through policy is the impact of poverty on Māori, and just calling out policy changes in Te Tiriti or Waitangi is a fantastic example of perpetrating poverty for a race of people, and that's something that we've experienced in this country for generations and generations. So there are still examples that are very clearly being demonstrated on why conferences such as this need to come together and call out and find solutions.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Stephen Turnick. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by William Saunders. I'm Amanda Gillies. Mā te wā.